welcome to the Indiana 1st District Congressional Debate here on Lakeshore PBS and Lakeshore Public Radio 89.1 FM, put together in partnership with the League of Women Voters of the Calumet area, Porter County, and LaPorte County. I'm Tom Maloney. I'll be your moderator for this debate as Democrat Frank Mervan, Libertarian Michael Strauss, and Republican Mark Leyva will discuss the policies that will impact Northwest Indiana for the 117th United States Congress. This is an open seat for Congress in the U.S. House of Representatives as Representative Pete Visclosky is retiring at the end of his 18th term. Representative Visclosky, we thank you for your dedication to Northwest Indiana. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to open. They will all be allowed up to 60 seconds to answer the question as put forth. Linda Trinkle, a member of the League of Women Voters, and also our timekeeper for the evening, will let you know when your time is up. A yellow card indicating 15 seconds, a red card indicating stop. At the duration of the debate, you will all have 60 seconds for your closing statements. We've drawn numbers tonight to determine who will answer first, and the order is as follows. Going first for their opening statement will be Michael Strauss, followed by Frank Mervan, and then Mark Leyva. Mr. Leyva will answer the first question first, as he went last in the opening statement. For our closing statements this evening, Mr. Mervan will go first. Mr. Strauss, your opening statement.
Thank you. As your 1st District Congressional candidate, I seek a nation of liberty, a nation in which all individuals are sovereign over their own lives and no one is forced to sacrifice his or her own values. I believe that respect for individual rights is the essential precondition for a free and prosperous nation. That force and fraud must be banished from human relationships. And that only through freedom can peace and prosperity be realized. I defend each person's right to engage in any activity that is peaceful and honest, and welcome the diversity that freedom brings. The nation I seek to rebuild is one where individuals are free to follow their own dreams in their own ways without interference from government or any other authoritative power. I support the right of the smallest of minorities, the individual.
Thank you, Mr. Strauss. Mr. Mervan, you can begin your opening statement.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to Lakeshore, and thank you to the League of Women Voters. My name is Frank Mervan, and I am a candidate for U.S. Congress. Because I've been a dedicated public servant who's been a servant leader, and I have been able to make an impact in my community, I want to be able to bring like-minded individuals to be able to come together to make our region a better place for current residents and for future generations. For the past 15 years, I've worked as a North Township trustee to be able to help people find jobs, to be able to help people have access to health care and mental health. And as a member of Congress, I am going to focus to make sure that we have a growing economy that is able to have family-sustaining jobs and to be able to have access to health care and to be able to have access to mental health. Those are my priorities and my intentions. And when it comes to healthcare, I believe that we have to get through this health crisis and this economic crisis. And how we do that is we have to make sure, as a member of Congress, we work steadily and
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. Mr. Leyva, you have 60 seconds for your opening statement.
Okay. I want to first thank Lakeshore Radio and League of Women Voters. Hello, voters. A 1st Congressional District. My name is Mark Leyva, and your 2020 Republican nominee for U.S. House of Representatives, 1st District, Indiana. I am your pro-gun candidate with a concealed carry permit of 20 years. I am a pro-life candidate, a defender of life. I'm a staunch defender of our First Amendment rights, free speech, right to peaceful assembly, freedom of religion. I will go to Washington to make permanent your tax cuts so you have more money on your paychecks. I support Trump's border walls initiative and his legal immigration policies. I am here now, and when I'm elected, to serve you, the people.
Thank you, Mr. Leyva. You'll be answering this question first. President Donald Trump has ushered in an era of Trumpian politics in Washington, D.C. Northwest Indiana is a region that is a melting pot of urban life, country living, as well as the burbs, bringing together thousands of people from every walk of life, from different religious creeds, racial backgrounds, and economic standings. How will you, as a member of the 117th United States Congress, represent Northwest Indiana in Washington, D.C.? Mr. Leyva, you'll be going first, Mr. Mervan second, and Mr. Strauss third.
Okay. Well, as a member of Congress, the main thing to do is to pass legislation that will enable us to have much better jobs and have the economy stimulated so that it affects our local economy, and taking off the backs of businesses off the backs of businesses all the regulations that Mr. Trump has currently enacted and is still maintaining to make sure that businesses have a much better opportunity to expand and create jobs. I also think that our job as a congressman is to make sure that if there are grants to be any kind of monies to help our communities, I'd like to see them block granted to our states. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leyva. Just under the bell, Mr. Mervan.
So, Tom, I thank you very much for the question. As a member of Congress, what I have done as a North Township trustee has been able to bring people together. Our No More Secrets campaign that was able to protect young people from child molesters and predators and be able to make a state law in the state of Indiana, working across the aisle to be able to accomplish that, is an example of what we're able to do when we find like-minded individuals. And you're right, Northwest Indiana is a melting pot of many religions, creeds, and races. And we have to treat people with respect. And as a member of Congress, how we do that is we find family-sustaining jobs. I'm going to protect the steel industry with strong trade pacts and strong trade deals. I'm going to make sure that it's a matter of national security, that we are protecting our steel industry on a global economy and also from global dumping. I'm also going to make sure that we invest in an infrastructure bill with a Buy American provision so that we're able to get our economy back to work. It's important that we respect all religions and creeds and that we work together to make our economy great.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. Just under the bell as well. Mr. Strauss, you have 60 seconds.
So as a member of Congress, the first thing that I will strive to do above anything else is to, when anything comes in front of me to vote on, I'm going to take a look at the Constitution, and I'm going to base that vote on the Constitution, first and foremost. If anything supersedes that, then the obvious vote is no. But with that, I will reduce regulations. That is the second highest priority, is to reduce regulations, not only government and to businesses, reduce red tape, things like that, but reduce taxes, put those back in your pocket where they belong, where you can make those wise decisions on how you wish for your tax dollars to be spent.
Thank you, Mr. Strauss. And answering first for this question will be Frank, followed by Mike, and then Mark. Section 232 of the 1962 Trade Expansion Act gives the president broad powers to restrict imports to protect national trade. However, U.S. Congress is given jurisdiction of trade by the Constitution. Current District 1 Representative Pete Visclosky has voiced his support in the past for the steel tariffs levied by President Trump. What are your views on the tariffs? Mr. Mervan.
So I want to thank you, Tom, and I want to take this opportunity to thank Congressman Visclosky for his endorsement in my campaign during the primary with 14 individuals, and we share in common making sure that we protect the steel industry. In Section 232, they also made it a matter of national security in order to protect the steel industry. And those tariffs, when they started off, were very productive. And we want to be able to continue to monitor those to make sure that our steel industry is globally competitive. We have a very fluid steel industry, and we want to make sure that not only do we have an infrastructure bill that focuses on a Buy American provision that is able to keep our steel workers working, but also every single day protecting with strong trade deals that protect the steel industry in this global market. And so I am for the Section 232. As a member of Congress, I will make sure that we protect the steel industry and examine those policies.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. And Mike Strauss. Or excuse me, I'm sorry. Yes, Mike Strauss, you're answering next.
So these tariff policies, as was previously stated, were good at first, and tariffs can be used wisely in certain situations. However, I am a staunch supporter of free trade and an open market. I believe that that is the only way that we can fully benefit as a society and in a world economy, is to have an open market, have free trade, and allow the consumer to decide what companies they're going to support and which ones they're not going to support based on different things, whether they choose to support one thing for a certain belief or another for a different belief. It's a difference between purchasing an Apple or an Android.
Thank you, Mr. Strauss. Mr. Leyva.
Yes, the part about the tariffs industry on steel, again, free trade is always the best ability to get better quality products and better quality prices. In the steel industry, in the history of negotiations with steel, our tariffs have saved a lot of our steel industry at times. Over a long period, it is not good. But President Trump, very strategic-like and business-like, have used the tariffs to help save the steel industry. At the same time, he was negotiating better trade deals with individual countries. And that's what's the best part of this whole business-like opportunity that our president has saved steel.
Thank you, Mr. Leyva. How can Indiana take advantage of and increase the development of high-speed rail? Answering first will be Mike Strauss.
Well, transportation and infrastructure of that sort is very important. High-speed rail could bring quite a bit new business to the area that may not have been available before, that is being taken advantage of in other areas of the country. However, I don't support government-backed finance or subsidy of high-speed rail. I believe that should be privately funded, and if it works, then it works. And if there are companies that believe that believe in that and would take advantage of that, then they would be interested in investing in those types of companies. And we should never rely on a government subsidy to support any type of rail system or otherwise.
Thank you, Mr. Strauss. Mr. Leyva.
Again, yes, I agree that free market should take precedent. If not, there's always the public-private sector that we could possibly use. But again, if it's not encouraged by the private sector, then yes, I don't see a reason for public money to be used in a high-speed rail system. Because if it's a necessity, and if it's feasible and it could be profitable, the private sector could always do a much better job than the government itself. That's good. I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Leyva. Mr. Mervan.
So the question is about high-speed rail in Indiana, and down the road, maybe we'll see that. No state in the Union of the United States of America has high-speed rail, so that's something we always have to look to, because what we're trying to do is increase commerce. And what Congressman Visklowski has started is the expansion of the South Shore and also the double tracking as an economic development project here in Northwest Indiana. And the things that that will do is when government invests in the double tracking, it is allowing for transit-oriented development in the communities of Chesterton, Valpo, Gary, Miller, and all along and through Munster and Dyer. And what that will allow us to do in Hammond and East Chicago with that transit-oriented development is the government invests. We're able to have a modal of commerce, the train, that will be able to attract talent and people to live in our community. And then more importantly, it'll allow businesses to do what they do best, to be able to invest and create businesses so that men and women can have family sustaining jobs in those areas. And that's how government invests and has economic development.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. Brain drain. It's a slang term referring to the migration of highly trained or intelligent people, normally phrased when talking about a loss of those individuals from a particular area. Northwest Indiana, along with the rest of the Hoosier state, has seen younger residents leave for bigger cities outside of the Midwest. What policies and plans would you put forth to hold off the brain drain? Mr. Leyva, you'll be going first. Sir, Mr. Leyva, please unmute yourself. Thank you. And Linda, if we can restart the timer for Mr. Leyva.
All right. Well, the first thing is, without a very strong economy, whether it's your locals and state economies, you will not be able to keep the young, intelligent, educated individuals here in our state. We have to create good jobs and a good economic system so that when they do leave the colleges, they can come and earn a decent wage. And I know that there's a lot, Indiana has been doing very good things to bring jobs and opportunity here. But I just feel that having a strong economy with tax cuts and giving businesses the unrestricted ability to do their jobs, to expand and give higher pay. And the other thing is you can't have illegal aliens taking the jobs that would then create better wages.
Thank you, Mr. Leyva, getting in just on the mark. Up next is Mr. Mervan.
So the quality of life in Northwest Indiana is one of the most important aspects of what we have to be able to protect. Our lakeshore, that is a national park, is something that will bring in young talent, along with people who want to live next to Chicago. And we want to be able to, Mark is right, focus on economic development, bring in industries that are accessible to our assets, which is the lakefront, which is the Gary Airport, which is the 8094, which is rail, which is ports. We've got to be able to attract businesses that bring in a quality of life and that have a family sustaining job and that attract people. And how you do that as a member of Congress is you work with the state of Indiana on the state level to make sure we're attracting talent. You work with the local leaders and you make sure that as a member of Congress, you're creating the economic and development infrastructure to be able to bring people and have skilled talent come to our nation and to our district.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. Mr. Strauss.
So as a business owner in northern Indiana for the last 20 some years here, I've experienced this brain drain and not been able to hire all of the qualified candidates that I necessarily wanted and in specialized fields. And we have in Northwest Indiana so many resources and so many assets in our community. However, one of the biggest problems that we have is the red tape and government intervention, taxes. The burden on businesses is enormous, and we need to reduce that burden so then that way we can be able to attract more skilled labor and more skilled individuals to not only bring businesses, but also work for businesses.
Thank you, Mr. Strauss. We'll now switch gears, moving on from business and the economy into the environment. Northwest Indiana has a history of air, water, and ground pollution. The Post-Tribune in August of this year reported that the region has Indiana's worst ground level ozone. What will you do to make sure the Environmental Protection Agency regulations protect our environment, especially with regards to industrial waste in Lake Michigan's watershed, including air, water, and shorelines? Mr. Mervan, you'll be answering first.
Well, as you mentioned, we have to be able to attract young talent, and our environment is key to that. And that's what I mentioned. And so how you work with the Environmental Protection Agency is make sure that they have the teeth and the ability to be able to prevent discharge into Lake Michigan and make sure that we have clean air and clean water. As a North Township trustee, I was at ground zero when East Chicago had its lead crisis, and we had to relocate over 600 families from East Chicago. We don't want to ever see that again. And as a member of Congress, we're going to make sure that the EPA has the ability to regulate and make sure that our air is clean and our water is drinkable. And we have to be able to work with industry to make sure that we continue to be able to have and provide for jobs. So we have to work hand in hand to do that. So when we talk about the industrial environment and our clean air and clean water, we have to work hand in hand and make sure the EPA has the teeth to be able to enforce the laws on the book and not allow them to self-regulate, and make sure we also protect our manufacturing base.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan.
Thank you.
Mr. Strauss.
So I don't believe that the bureaucracies are the way to go in handling situations like this. They obviously don't work. Businesses still pollute. People still pollute. Our environment. Some may say that that our environment is worse off today than it was when the EPA was first formed. However, what we need to look at, and what I believe will help strengthen environmental policy, is to pass laws that will help strengthen the ability for an individual or groups of individuals to be able to take advantage of full restitution for any proven liability that for things that have occurred that have affected them.
Thank you, Mr. Strauss. And Mr. Leyva.
Yes, well, I totally agree that the environmental laws are good to protect safety of our environment. But I do know that when some government agencies have all that control, first of all, any legislation should be passed by Congress of any types of laws first. And then if it is for the EPA, they should enforce them. But I strongly do not believe that any agency or arm of the federal government should be passing laws or any kind of regulations that do not go through Congress. So all I could say is we do have some problems. It may be locally and they need to be enforced better, but overall our country, air and water pollution is probably its best it's ever been in history.
Thank you, Mr. Leyva. And you are watching on Lakeshore PBS and listening on Lakeshore Public Radio 89.1 FM to the Indiana 1st District Congressional Debate with Frank Mervan, the Democratic nominee, Mike Strauss, the Libertarian, and Mark Leyva, the Republican. Answering first on this question will be Mike Strauss. The nonprofit Calumet Heritage Partnership a bi-state organization that worked for nearly a decade to create the Calumet Heritage Area, now seeks the Heritage Area to be designated a National Heritage Area. This effort has the support of Senators Todd Young and Mike Braun and Illinois Congresswoman Robin Kelly. The 1st Congressional District dominates the geographical area of the Heritage Area, so it needs the support of the 1st District Congressman. Would you support the National Heritage Area designation, and would you introduce legislation needed to achieve this? Mr. Strauss.
Yes, I do believe that I would support that. I believe that it is very important and that designation would serve quite a few purposes in helping Northwest Indiana move forward and progress in its in achieving so many things here in the near future.
Thank you, Mr. Strauss. And up next will be Mr. Leyva.
I will just say this. It'd be nice to have my face while I'm talking. But I do agree that I would stand for that legislation, support the legislation in any way possible, since this idea is already a bipartisan idea that could bring good environmental awareness to our community.
Mr. Leyva, just to note, the viewers on Lakeshore PBS can see your face crystal clear. The listeners on Lakeshore Public Radio, well, it's theater of the mind. Mr. Mervan, go ahead.
Tom, I had an opportunity on yesterday, believe it or not, to have about a 10 to 15 minute conversation about the Calumet Heritage Area, which will wrap around the entire lakefront and also brings in the history of the steel industry and also the preservation of the lakeshore. So I will be in full support of that piece of legislation. And also, I think this is an opportunity to highlight how important it is in the state of Indiana to be able to work with Senator Braun and to be able to work with Senator Young and find like-minded issues like this. As we have gone on and as we've talked about in the nation, there's a lot of fighting and bickering. But on issues like this, when you find like-minded issues, something that is good for Northwest Indiana and for the region, you can understand why Senator Braun, Senator Young, and as a member of Congress, I would be able to support that and work with them to better our Northwest Indiana and the lakeshore.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. Lake Michigan is at record high water levels. This, combined with the increased severity of storms, is destroying much of Indiana's Lake Michigan recreational shoreline. Perhaps more important is the lakeshore that's not recreational nor visible to the public, and that's the industrial lakefront, which is equally battered by the high lake levels and severe storms. Considering the phrase, water always wins, what is your plan to preserve the recreational lakefront and to prevent any land-based toxic or harmful substances stored in these lakefront industrial sites from entering the lake? Mr. Leyva, you'll be going first.
Okay, first of all, that's not a federal issue. If it should be up to state legislators to come up with solutions on a local issue, a state issue. Now, if they need federal funding and help, then that's where the federal legislation comes in. If you look and read the U.S. Constitution, it talks about where we spend and what, where money is supposed to be spent, whether it's constitutional or not. So this being a state issue, a local issue, should be brought up through the channels of your local mayors, then your local state legislators, and then brought to the attention of a federal legislator. And that's how I'm going to leave it, because this is not a constitutional issue.
Thank you, Mr. Leyva. Mr. Mervan.
Unfortunately, about 40 miles of Lake Michigan shoreline from Whiting to Lowell are impacted and are facing devastating erosion. It was a matter of emergency in Portage, in Porter, and so that is a threatening to our public safety, our homes and our roads. And it's also impacting the strength of our regional economy. And so what we have to do, this was caused by a variety of factors, including high level of the lakes, like you mentioned, and the climate change, which is real. And as a member of Congress, I'm going to focus and work together with all entities, local, state, and federal, to be able to make sure that we are addressing this issue, and most importantly, being able to solve this challenge together in a bipartisan approach from those three entities, and make sure that no one town or city is going to be able to solve the issue. We're going to have to require participation from us all and be able to make sure that we look forward in collaboration as a member of Congress. And also, to the second part of your question, to be able to protect the lakefront from contaminants from the industrial side is something that we will always focus on.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. Mr. Strauss.
So that I don't miss this, first of all, I believe as per the contaminant issue affecting the rest of the lakefront, as I mentioned earlier, if a contaminant affects an area, and whether it be a municipality or an individual, I believe that they have a cause of action in a court to be able to go after that individual for harming them. And that should be the appropriate way to go about it. In addition, we need to hold businesses that wish to do business on our lakeshore accountable for their own expenses. All right? They don't ask the federal government to pay for salt for their private roads on their property.
Thank you, Mr. Strauss. We'll now shift gears once again to healthcare, the Affordable Care Act, Medicare, Medicaid, and the Healthy Indiana Plan. The Affordable Care Act is set to face the United States Supreme Court for the third time. Nearly 500,000 Hoosiers would lose their health insurance under the Healthy Indiana Plan if the ACA is found unconstitutional. What would you propose to replace the Affordable Care Act should it be struck down? Mr. Mervan.
First and foremost, I want to say that I support the Affordable Care Act, and what we have absolutely come to realize during this COVID-19 crisis is how important health insurance is as people lost their jobs. So the Affordable Care Act provides that. I also want to say that I absolutely positively want to make sure we have provisions to be able to protect pre-existing conditions. But when it comes to specifically your question about the Healthy Indiana Plan, there's about 1.6 million people on that. And if 385,000 people lose their health care, what are we going to do in exchange of that? Well, we're first going to make sure that we do everything we can to preserve the Affordable Care Act. But then secondly, we've got to be able to have a health care policy that makes sure that there is a public option. And if you have fought or sacrificed as a labor union or a steel worker or as a teacher to have an insurance plan, that you're able to keep that. But more importantly, if you have to get into insurance, you have an affordable exchange. What you need to know about the Healthy Indiana Plan is Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield is buying into it. And on November 1st, you're going to be able to, in Lake Porter and LaPorte County, be able to purchase it. This is something I've worked on as a trustee. Thank you,
sir. Mr. Leyva.
Yes. As far as the Affordable Health Care Plan, that has devastated families all over, have increased their health insurance by 4 times or more. And for all you union workers that you never had to pay anything before, that the Affordable Care Act actually causes you, the working guy, now to be paying. Before, you didn't have that before the Affordable Care Act. My proposal is the Republican free market plan, protect the free existing conditions, remove government costly and intrusive roles, enact medical liability reform, transparent billing, free market access for our pharmaceutical industry, and most of all, as far as we do need to prepare and save any local state health care for the needy.
Thank you, Mr. Leyva. Mr. Strauss.
So the Affordable Care Act has absolutely devastated not only Americans, but our healthcare system in general. It has skyrocketed pricing. It has caused Americans more money than it has ever and ever will save them. We need to get rid of the Affordable Health Care Act. We need to provide legislation that will allow for medical providers, give them incentives to offer discounts to uninsured Americans, so that way they can afford health care on the wages that they're earning. We have a plan that we can move forward with if I'm elected to provide that as a private healthcare basis. We're keeping your pre-existing conditions in place, all of that.
Thank you, Mr. Strauss. We are out of time on that question. However, the next one does tie into a lot of what all three of you spoke about already. What will you do as a member of Congress to help alleviate the ever-growing costs of healthcare? Beginning first will be Mr. Strauss.
To alleviate the ever-growing cost of healthcare, first of all, healthcare providers should be transparent. However, it's not the government's job to regulate that and tell them you must be transparent. All right. If you want transparency, do business with businesses that wish to be transparent, and encourage those providers to do so. We also need to, like I said, pass legislation to encourage healthcare providers, give them tax incentives to be able to provide healthcare at a lower cost to individuals who don't have health coverage, or who may have substandard health coverage that costs them a little bit more and they don't get as good of benefits. But we cannot continue down the path that we are with public healthcare funding. It drains our country. It puts an undue burden on taxpayers.
Thank you, Mr. Strauss. Thank you. Mr. Leyva.
Okay. I just want to say the first thing we need to do is to repeal the Affordable Health Care Act that has cost too many families and individuals the loss of expendable income, and also all our fellow union workers that added burden of cost that they never had prior to the Affordable Health Care Act. We need free market policies. We need across the state line purchasing power. We need, well, I could say Kansas City, Dr. Umber has a 24/7 concierge program that provides low cost, subscription cost healthcare with a lot of other benefits that saves the individual monies. And we have to look through guys like Dr. Umber.
Thank you, Mr. Leyva. Mr. Mervan.
So in Indiana, we talked about the Healthy Indiana Plan. There's about 1.6 million people on the Indiana Healthy Plan, which is a part of the Affordable Care Act. And so that's about 22 to 24% of our population. And what we have to make sure that we focus on is those individuals are able to keep their health care. And when it comes to union labor, to make sure that they're able to keep their plans that they have sacrificed for, that they have given up for in the unions, and that they can still keep that protection and to be able to have those health insurance. We also have to be able to have a public option. Your specific question was about how do we reduce or alleviate the costs. We absolutely focus on a population medicine, which is making sure that it has a preventative front load and that we're able to get to people on a healthy side from the very beginning and incentivize physicians and hospitals to be able to focus on preventative medicine. Then we have to be able to have a charter list of what costs. There shouldn't be a cost of health, private coverage, Medicaid, and uninsured. There should be across the board leave transfer.
Be unmuted as well. Thank you, Mr. Mervan. You are out of time. We'll shift gears here. We have just a few minutes left for this debate for District 1 for Indiana Congress as we look to replace the great Representative Pete Visklosky, who for 18 terms represented Northwest Indiana. We've got Libertarian candidate Michael Strauss, Democratic candidate Frank Mervan, and Republican candidate Mark Leyva. Mark, you'll be going first on this question. Do you approve of the current administration's immigration and asylum policies? If not, how can the immigration system be repaired?
I do. I actually do agree with all the immigration policies that this current administration and this president has moved forward. I believe that we have other avenues to improve on, such as the overstayed visas, which is, I believe, 40% of illegal immigration, overstayed visas. So we have still work to go, but putting up the border wall is a very first big step. All right. And then also, DACA, which was a presidential executive order that our court systems overturn, but that's the job of Congress. Congress needs to vote to extend that if they do. That's where we have to get Congress off their butt and to do their jobs that deem important to the American people.
Thank you, Mr. Leyva. Mr. Mervan.
So I'm proud as a North Township trustee that we were able to assist as a resource individuals seeking entry into our country and have actively helped people who are here throughout coordinating citizenship classes, English as a second language, and we partnered up with Catholic Charities and their immigration center to be able to assist individuals who are here for a pathway to citizenship. Our nation is a nation of immigrants. My grandfather came over from Czechoslovakia and began working in the harbor at Inland Steel. He worked there for 43 years. We're the greatest nation in the world that people want to be able to come here, and we should be able to have a policy that attracts talent and make sure that we are able to control what is coming in as far as immigration, and the people who are here be able to have a pathway to citizenship, but also to be able to make sure that the process is working and that we go forward. I am not for a wall, but what I am for is America being the best country in the entire world and making sure we attract the world. And as a member of Congress.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. We are out of time on that question, Mr. Mervan. Thank you. Mr. Strauss.
All right. So I first of all want to be clear that while I am for immigration, and I am for the most part for open borders, I do not believe in any way that we should incentivize immigrants to come here simply for welfare, for healthcare, for any type of government subsidy. We should not be doing that whatsoever. There should be no incentive like that. We are a great nation. We are a great nation for a lot of reasons, and those reasons should be the reasons why immigrants want to come here. It should not be for government subsidies, for welfare, or anything like that. We have a great educational system. We have great health care in terms of a lot of other areas in the world. We have a lot of things that should encourage that.
Sir, we are out of time on that question. Just a few minutes left for the debate this evening. CBS News reported in July that Indiana ranks 31st in the nation in gun ownership. 44.8% of adults own at least one gun here in the Hoosier State. Should the federal government restrict the type of guns individuals can buy? Mr. Mervan, you'll answer first.
I absolutely am for common sense gun reform. One of the most moving experiences I've had as a North Township trustee, we do burials for the indigent, was with Ollie Hubbard from Hammond, who lost her daughter to a senseless gunfight that was in central part of Hammond. And we walked through that process and the justice process with her, and she will never be the same. And so we have to be able to have common sense gun safety regulations. I believe in the Second Amendment, and I believe in sportsmen's, and I don't want to take anyone's guns away. But what we have to do is have common sense gun reform and safety rules that allow us to make sure that we have background checks, close loopholes, and that we're able to, like the red flag law, people who are deemed mentally incompetent should not have access to guns, and be able to close the loophole that a boyfriend who is stalking or a girlfriend who is stalking a mate does not have access to a gun. There are a lot of, there's 80% of Americans.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. We are out of time on that question. Mr. Strauss.
So for starters, all that really should need to be said is the Second Amendment is the Second Amendment, period. No questions asked. End of story, over and done with it. That's the Constitution. Take whatever you want to call gun reform and throw it out the window, because that's just the way it is. But apparently we have to go deeper than that, because if you really want gun reform, then then what you have to have is you have to have a reform of the economy. You don't just have people going out and committing crimes with guns simply because the economy is great, because they're having a great time in life, simply because, they're mentally stable, things like that. We need mental health care reform. We need criminal justice reform. We need a lot of different things. But taking people's guns away, that is not gun reform. That is authoritarianism and socialism.
Thank you, Mr. Strauss. Mr. Leyva.
Yes. First of all, I am definitely pro Second Amendment, pro keeping your guns. We have a problem with individuals. Guns don't commit the crime. People do that. John Lott out of the University of Chicago, more guns, less crime. You could go to different states where they all carry a gun. You have a lot less crime. Okay, I'm not pretending. My Mr. Mervan has taken money. I won't even go there. But if he wants to take your guns, that's his problem. I want to make sure everybody is protected by the Second Amendment, and they should keep their guns. And there are no loopholes in selling guns at gun shows. I've been there hundreds and hundreds of times. I've never seen Mr. Mervan at a gun show.
Thank you, Mr. Leyva. We have time for about 2 more questions. We'll move on to education. Early childhood education in Indiana ranks towards the bottom nationally. What will you do at the national level to help the people of this state to provide Indiana families with more birth through kindergarten family support and educational opportunities? Answering first, Mr. Strauss.
Well, for starters, if our property taxes actually went what they're supposed to go for, then our public educational system would have probably the proper funding. However, it doesn't, and it never will. And legislators, both Democrats and Republicans, will forever continue to steal from that pot until it's absolutely broke, penniless, and then they want more money. What we need to do is we need to privatize our school systems and put that money back in your pocket, so that way you can provide the education for your child as you see fit. All right. And if that means if that means homeschooling them, great. If that means sending them to a charter school or a private school, then that's great too, because you'll have the money to do that. You won't have to rely on a socialist school system to do so for you.
Thank you, Mr. Strauss. We got to move it along here. Mr. Leyva.
Yes. There are our public school systems have been failing our children's education. There is a necessity for school choice, and there are other avenues like homeschooling. And yes, I think the parents themselves, it's their money that they pay these taxes. They should have some type of financial voucher if they deem to send their children to better schools. Now, we have great school teachers. My father was a school teacher for 35 years, and most of his students really say he did a fabulous job to make their life better. And I just think that if they're failing, the school system's failing, it's time for change. It's time for school choice, and let the parents have the opportunity of choice.
Thank you, Mr. Leyva. Mr. Mervan.
So first and foremost, I believe in our public education system, and as a North Township trustee, we dealt with poverty, and we were able to work with families that were 0 to 24 months to 5 years old specifically, and put a program together that was Parents as Teachers, where they were able to go into the homes and developmentally help people. So what we need to do as the federal government and as a member of Congress is prioritize our dollars to make sure that we have funding and programs that are allocated to the public education system to be able to help those 24 to 5 years old, so that when a student hits kindergarten, they are educated, empowered, and ready to go.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. And unfortunately, we're out of time, as these things do happen. We will now wrap up the debate portion of the evening and move on to our closing statements as drawn at the top of the show. Mr. Leyva, you will go first with your closing statement. You have 60 seconds.
Okay.
Oh, you're still muted, sir.
Okay.
There we go.
All right. Voters of 1st Congressional District, I am honored and proud to address the voters with these issues discussed here today. My agenda is simple, and I am here to serve you. I want to go to Washington to work to improve our lives for the future of our children and grandchildren. I am not a politician. I am never served in public office, but I am willing to go to Washington to fight to improve your lives.
Oh, Mr. Leyva, your mic cut out.
Okay. I want our people to have great healthcare system, exceptional educational opportunities, good paying jobs, stable and safe communities to live in. Mark Leyva wants the future that is brighter and better and given to our children that we have and in our families. With this transparent agenda,
Thank you, Mr. Leyva. We are out of time. And Mr. Mervan, I owe you an apology. You should have gone first on the close. That's my mistake. You have 60 seconds for your closing statement, Mr. Mervan.
I am Frank Mervan, and I am running for Congress in order to bring the region together and to be able to bring transformational investments to be able to increase our economy. I have the experience that have looked across the table to see people who are struggling. We've got to be able to have jobs that are family sustaining. We have to be able to work on our educational program. We've got to be able to protect the steel industry and the steel workers. And we've got to be able to have someone who believes in and understands that climate change is real, and we have to be able to focus on making sure that we have a clean environment and water and air. But when it comes to jobs and healthcare and getting through this healthcare crisis, we have to make sure that we have access, and that we make sure that when it comes to healthcare, people have mental health access and they have the ability to be able to be served. And as a member of Congress, I am going to Washington, D.C. to be able to make Northwest Indiana the most thriving area that we possibly can.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. And Mr. Strauss, you have 60 seconds for your closing statement.
Constituents of the 1st District, whenever any form of government becomes destructive of individual liberty, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to agree to such new governance as they shall deem most likely to protect their liberty. So this election, let us abolish the old standard of fake representation and get back to true constitutional representation and governance. It is time for a change in Washington. Let's bring those tax dollars back to your pocket and representation back to your mind. We, the people, are the founders of government. and the masters of how our tax dollars get spent and how our government is run. Please vote Libertarian. I look forward to your vote. A vote for Strauss for Congress is a vote for you.
Thank you, Mr. Strauss. And I'd like to personally thank Linda Trinkle, from the League of Women Voters, our timekeeper this evening. Thank you to Mr. Frank Mervan, Mr. Michael Strauss, and Mr. Mark Leyva for your time for this debate, the first district congressional debate here on Lakeshore PBS, as well as Lakeshore Public Radio, 89.1 FM, and streaming wherever you find us. Don't forget, we'll have full election night coverage on Tuesday, November 3rd, beginning at 6 p.m. on Lakeshore Public Radio. For Lakeshore Public Radio and Lakeshore PBS, I'm Tom Maloney. Thanks for watching.